Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and if you've already started or you're thinking of starting career mode in Flight Sim, learning to manage your fuel is an important skill if you find yourself running low near the end of a flight, so we're going to look at a few different ways that you can handle this. The techniques we're going to look at are also important if you're taking off or landing at altitudes above 3,000 feet, so this will definitely give you a leg up if you're starting your career somewhere like Aspen or any mountainous area really. The first thing that you should know about is the fuel tank selector, because it always defaults to using the left tank first from cold and dark. And if you leave it there throughout your flight, not only will you run out of fuel much more quickly, but you'll also end up with an imbalance since one wing is going to have way more fuel than the other, and it can make flying the plane harder. The fuel tank selector is almost always on the floor or near the center pedestal, depending on the airplane, and it works a little bit differently from one to the other. Some will automatically switch the tanks for you, like in the TBM 930, while others require you to do it by hand, like in the SR22 and the Bonanza. And then there are some planes, like in the 172, that allow you to select both tanks at once so that you can set it and forget it. It's always best to make sure that you know how it works for the plane that you're flying first so that you remember to manage it throughout the flight. Otherwise, you can end up with your engine running out of fuel even though there's plenty left in the tanks. If you did forget to swap the tanks over, you can check what your current fuel usage is on the multifunction display, and then what you could do is run the tank that has more fuel in it a little bit longer to equalize it out. Once you're actually underway and leveled off at your cruise altitude, there are two more things that you can do to reduce your fuel consumption, and the first of those is to use a more conservative power setting, which will reduce your cruise speed by a little bit, but if you're low on fuel, it can be worth it to actually make it to your destination. Our fuel flow at full RPM is about 16 gallons per hour, but a typical power setting for the C172 at cruise would be something more like 22 to 2300 RPM. So instead, if we start to reduce our throttle now to bring it down closer to that range, we'll see that our fuel flow is going to drop off a fair bit. And once we eventually get it down to 2300, it'll be just a touch under 10 gallons per hour. So that's a good 6 to 7 gallons per hour that we just saved. Once that's set, for piston planes, we can also lean the engine either for best power or best economy, and that'll help to reduce our fuel consumption down even more. As you climb above 3,000 feet is where you'll want to start to think about leaning the engine, and what's actually happening is that the ideal fuel to air mixture changes, and you actually need less fuel than you would at ground level, so the red mixture lever allows you to lower the amount of fuel that's actually going into the engine. When the lever is pushed full forward like it is right now, that means that our mixture is rich, and pulling it out towards us will lean the mixture. And there are a few different techniques that you can use to lean it properly, but the easiest that I find is to go into the engine menu, then into the lean option, and finally into the assist mode. That's going to bring the EGT or exhaust gas temperature monitor up, and what we're going to do is pull the mixture lever out, which is going to increase the EGT until we find its peak value. Before you start leaning though, you'll want to make sure that you're level at your cruise altitude, your cruise power has been set as well, and ideally you're using the autopilot to at least maintain your heading and altitude while you focus on the engine instruments. Once that's all set though, you can start to slowly pull the mixture lever out, which will make the EGT start to rise. You have to do this very slowly though, because if you pull the mixture too quickly, you'll end up starving your engine, and obviously that's not a good thing if you want it to keep flying. As I'm pulling the mixture out, I'm watching for the EGT to stop increasing, because that's when we're going to stop leaning the mixture. And if I were to keep going, on the other hand, the EGT would start to drop off and we run the risk of cutting out our engine. It looks like we just went past the peak now, which was 1480 degrees. So to set ourselves up for the best economy configuration, what we need to do now is push the mixture lever back in slightly to get back to that peak EGT that we went past. That's going to give us about 9 gallons per hour of fuel flow. So again, we've extended our range out by about 1 more gallon per hour. When you aren't short on fuel, it's actually recommended to be on the rich side of peak EGT, so pushed a little bit more forward. And for the 172, they recommend to be 50 degrees rich of peak to find the best power configuration. Our PKGT seems to be up to 1485 now, so what I'll actually do is push the mixture lever back in just a wee bit until it comes down to 1435, and we should be all set. The best power configuration that we've set up now doesn't really result in much, if any, fuel economy though, so it's very situational as to when you'd use each setting. You can also always easily estimate if you're going to make it to your destination by combining the fuel flow and your remaining fuel quantity. So for example, here I've got about 20 gallons left, and at 8 gallons per hour, I can stay airborne for well over an hour, and it's just under 20 minutes to get to the airport, so I'll be more than fine at this power setting. Anytime that you change altitudes, you'll have to lean the engine again because it'll be a different PKGT. And when you come into land, you'll want to bring the mixture lever all the way forward again, assuming of course that you're landing near sea level. When you're landing at high altitude, instead of just pushing the mixture all the way in, you'll want to lean the engine once you get to pattern altitude so that you have the maximum power available if you need to go around. What I do in that situation is I'll start by applying full power, and then I'll adjust the mixture to find where it gives me the maximum RPM instead. And then from there, I can enrich the mixture just slightly so that everything's all set up. It's similar if you're taking off from high altitude, and you'll actually have to lean the engine before heading off by applying full power while you're still on the ground and doing the same procedure that we just did, because otherwise you could find yourself without enough power to actually get airborne. If the piston plane that you're flying doesn't have a mixture control, it's likely a FADEC control plane like the Diamond DA40, and in that case it automatically does all of this for you, so you don't have to worry about it. If you're flying a turboprop instead, you don't actually lean the engine because it's a turbine engine that works quite differently from a piston engine. And in that case, your best bet to reduce fuel consumption is to reduce your torque setting with the throttle. And if it has a prop lever, you can bring that down to a similar 22 to 2300 RPM. There are some situations though where you will have to add more fuel before you head off for your flight, which you should be able to do from the tablet. And for a piston or turboprop, you can just fill the tanks right up if you like, so long as you're below your max takeoff weight. It seems like there are some bugs at the moment though with adding fuel via the tablet, but one workaround that I've seen is to map the add fuel binding to a button press on your keyboard, and that'll add fuel in 25% increments to your plane, so you can use this as a stopgap in situations where you just wouldn't have enough. The last thing that we can do to conserve fuel, especially for missions where you're not constrained to fly over a certain area, is to modify the flight plan to use a more efficient route, especially if there are strong winds to take advantage of or mountains that you need to get around. And we're going to address that in a future video, so make sure that you're subscribed on your way out so that you don't miss out on it.